Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast where we are two editors and friends. We are besties talking about some of our book selections that can help writers to approach books as reader. Oh, yes. I'm going to say it like this. I was going to get a tongue twister, but I'm going to work it out. Helping writers to read books and get inspiration and help us to really lock in and hone in on our stories. And I think this is one of the stories that we're looking at this month. That is one of those ones where you will be able to sort of cherry pick all these different elements about the story. And I will tell you this, y'all, we both work in different genres primarily. And so this is also one of those books that brings that together. Yeah, even though the intro was a little shoddy, I'm telling y'all, this is what we do because Rachel decided to add this clip. And until the takeoff is smooth, is Rachel's fault. But with that said,
it used to be smooth until I was like, oh, we should probably tell people what this podcast is about so that new listeners know what they're signing up for. And I did it on days when you were hosting.
Exactly. I'm gonna have something. It's gonna, because I love a good intro. My intro for Danger Tales is locked and loaded. Like I can say it in my sleep. So y'all, we're gonna get there. But with that said, today's episode we're gonna be talking about The Characters and One for the Money by Janet Evanovich, which is book 1 of the Stephanie Plum series. But before we get into that conversation, we were kind of chopping it up beforehand like we always do. And I was telling Rachel a little bit about like what I've had going on. And so in the last couple of weeks, I found myself out in Cali. Now listen, y'all, I'm in Houston. Okay. Houston, y'all, pardon my French. It is hot as hell. Okay. In Houston, it will make you live right. Okay. So to go to California, I mean, I lived in California for a short period of time when I was in junior high. So I just haven't been back since then, not for a layover or anything. And then I've never been we were in the Huntington Beach area. So the weather was amazing. The resort was amazing. And it was like right on the heels of coming out of the boot camp. So I needed that moment only for my brain to feel like it was exploding. I went to, is that the official name? The ROI Summit, I think is what they called it. Summit. And which is a part of the Hello Seven sort of world. And it was all about like building and exceeding $1 million business. And so it was very, listen, it was eye-opening. It was, first of all, I have never been to something that was so bougie in my life.
Life goals.
Period.
Man.
Listen, the decorations, it was a whole mood. Like Beyonce, I'm like soul food. I am a whole mood. It was a whole mood. And I was just like, as soon as I turned the corner, my mouth just dropped open because I was just like, okay, this is like, I did not have a lot of expectations, but even if I did, it would have exceeded them in that capacity of like what the energy was like, the fact that the primary audience are women and minorities that are not usually the headliners, if you will, or the speakers at these types of conferences. And I don't remember, and I'm so sorry, y'all. The keynote was a woman who is the only, I can't remember her ethnicity, but one of the only, I'm saying that because it may be one of very few, but one of the only women to ever climb all of the summits. And yes, why was her talk, because I don't know why, I was like, this woman who's a mountain climber, essentially that's what she and she's climbed them on every continent, like all 7 continents. And, oh goodness. And her talk was so good about, essentially she did this in her younger, like just out of youth, just like saying, I'm going to do this. She used to take pictures for the Dalai Lama.
Oh,
she was his
no
official
casual.
And had pictures of him in her presentation. Her mother had passed away, and she was essentially an orphan, passed around, and even at one point was like pursued by these different countries, thinking she was a terrorist. Like, her talk was so, and essentially a woman of color. And it was just so inspirational and not anything that I would have ever. Y'all, I'm going to make sure I put it in the show notes. And if I forget, Rachel, please remind me, because our talk was fantastic. And she has been highlighted by National Geographic, by Apple, like all of this. And she was just so laid back, bringing her pictures from her childhood and really just this energy of, like, don't let anything hold you back. Don't let the limitations that life places upon you hold you back from doing something essentially in her life that has been spectacular. So it was her. And another one of the main talks was from, her name is Fawn Weaver. And I know her because she is the CEO and the founder of Uncle, I think it's Uncle's. It's either a whiskey or bourbon line. When I tell you that woman could breathe and I would sit in the audience, she was fire, just talking about of like how to enter rooms and how when she was going into these rooms, she's one of the few Black female billionaires.
Wow.
She was going into these rooms and she dropped out of high school.
Wow.
She was like, so if somebody, because they would ask like, how did you go into these rooms and be confident? She was like, I'm going toe to toe with them. So what does it say about you? She was just everything. And so we had a lot of like substantive sessions that we went to about building your brand, email list, all of that. But those were like some of the ones that it was an energy in the room, like fired up, pumped up energy that was like, okay, I've never, like, you knew that, like, for me, I've never experienced that before. To be in a room where the majority of the business owners in there, well, I mean, all of the business owners, give or take, there were a few men there, were women, and all races, nationalities, and the majority of them were minorities. And listen, fly. Now, I wasn't fly. Y'all listen. I decided early on, I'm not checking luggage. I decided early on. But baby, when I tell you they was fresh to death from top to bottom, listen, I was just there to look. But it was amazing. And I walked away with a lot of things because I did go to the extra time of like building business building sessions, but it was such an experience, on top of the fact that it was bougie, baby. It was bougie and luxury and all of the things. And I will make sure that those two people that I do put their names in, because I can't remember the other one, but she was fantastic. And so, yeah, I think it's so interesting. In a small aside, I did have a conversation with some people from Kit, which used to be Convert Kit, that we talked a lot about author newsletters and things that you can do to build your newsletters.
That's awesome.
It was. And then another a very interesting session about sponsorships and other avenues to earn as an author or a brand outside of, one-to-one like services and books. And so that was very interesting. And so I think it just was a well-rounded, on top of, I was sitting at one time at a meal with a woman that had a truck driving business, another woman who had, how would I say it? like like a a marriage intimacy coach.
Okay.
Exactly. Listen, okay.
I got you.
And then another was like a therapist. Like it was such another woman that was she was a contract worker that went into nonprofits to help with systems. Like it was it just, of course, me saying I'm a book coach and a steamy romance writer always had everybody like, what?
Can I ask you kind of like I want to have a follow-up because I think that this is something that I think authors kind of, have to deal with or have to face, I say face down, but it's just the fact that, our industry, right? We work in the arts. But we also have to run businesses. Like if we want to work in the arts and be able to work in the arts, then you have to be able to bring in an income and run a business. And it's something that I think often it's one of those hangups for authors, right? Of like, I have to run it. Even, I don't care if you're indie or trad, you have to run a business because even if you go trad, they're not doing everything for you.
Exactly.
Especially when you're a new author, the amount of marketing budget that you get, like so much of that is like you have to do the heavy lifting. And even, very popular authors who get crazy, whose books get the crazy marketing budget, they are still out there doing stuff, right? They are still running their business. And I don't even really have a specific question. I just kind of wondered if you would talk a little bit about being in the arts and running a business and how you approach that, because I talk to a lot of authors who are like, I just want to write my books and I just want people to find them and love them. And I'm like, I love you so much. It doesn't work like that. I'm so sorry. Like you know me, I will find the nicest possible way to say it. This is one of those things where I'm like, I appreciate that ideal. It's not gonna work like that. Like it's just is not gonna happen, So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, how you talk to your authors about that and how, you yourself as an author, someone working in the arts and running a business. I just wondered if you would talk a little bit about that and anything, you just take it away.
Well, yes, and before I take it away, her name was Wasfi Nazeen. I know I'm probably butchering it. She was Bangladesh. So she's a Bangladesh woman. If you look her up, I'll make sure I put it in the show notes because she was phenomenal. And she's also an author and all of that. And so was Fawn Weaver. And her company is called Uncle Nearest, which is a whiskey brand. And she's one of the world's 6 Black women to lead a $1 billion company.
Wow.
Okay. So yes, will I talk on it? Yes. And this will be somewhere where I will stand and plant a flag as someone who's building a multi-million-dollar company, that is based upon books, right? And literature. And I will say this, I think, one of the things that Danger tells that is very, fundamental to our space is ensuring that our authors are profitable. And I think that sometimes whenever I'm going into a conversation and people start having this conversation with me, I don't like having to ask this question, but it is a great starting point, which is, are you doing this to be creative or are you doing this to be profitable? Yep. And the reality is you can have both, but a lot of times the conversation is always on the creativity side, and I want you to have your creative freedom. But if your kids are anything like mine used to be, they like to eat. They don't eat air. They do like snacks. My kids like
photosynthesize.
Listen. And they kept growing, right? So they needed new clothes.
The nerve.
And listen. And so to me early on, that was so important. And that's another reason why this conference that I was going to was not a conference for writers. It was not a conference about books. This was a business boss bee conference. Okay. And it's because you are still, I manage people and pay payroll and have bookkeeping and have accountants and have lawyers, right? Listen, I am like Beyonce. I'm a whole mood and a brand. So therefore, I think it's important to sort of, there are times where you must put that hat on if you want to have a sense of longevity. And I think even if you say that I want to be traditionally published, that the opportunities are not like they used to be. And even if that is your goal, making sure that you have a sound business in place will ensure that when that opportunity comes to you, because we're going to speak it into existence, when it comes, that you can be able to use it as a springboard to do whatever it is that you want to do with your author brand, with your books, with your, everything that you want to do moving forward. Like I even sat down and had a long conversation with an attorney about my upcoming trademark stuff and all of that. Being responsible, if you will, for the gift of your creativity is something that I wouldn't take lightly, so that it can be something that goes out well beyond you. And it doesn't just happen, just like the books that we talk about. It doesn't just happen. And so putting yourself in spaces with people who are creative in their own way, it may not be in books or steamy romance novels, but we all are contributing something. And because of that contribution, we are also adding value to our families and our communities, that we are creating ecosystems in of ourselves. And that, and this is something that, again, I don't take lightly. And so I think it's so important. And here's the last part of that I think that it does is that having a sound business gives you creative freedom.
Yeah, truly.
Right? It gives it to you. The ability to go sit in your writer cave with lights on. Listen, with bougie coffee and whatever else you want, a great laptop or computer, right? Or else, writing can become what I always say is a very expensive hobby. Mm-hmm. So my clients are primarily they are all professional writers in that they get paid to write. And many of them are full-time or on their way to being full-time writers. And that is extremely important to me. And I believe that is something that I'm called to do and the people that I'm called to work with. And so, I think it's crucial. And so being in that kind of room and really allowing myself to be there and claiming like what I am building and how I am building it, and being responsible, down to examining and looking at every program, every structure, my funnels, everything. It is my responsibility as the CEO of my company to ensure that those things are in place. And I think, it goes beyond that because I personally don't write for sport. I don't write for hobby.
Yeah.
And that means making sure all those things are in place is how, I do get to write whatever I want to write. And if I make a shift or start a new pen name, I know what to do to get it started. And it's all based upon, sound business principles and being in a room like that where you have someone that's running $1 billion, brands and people that are starting things from scratch and people that are reinventing the spaces that they're in just lets me know that all of it is possible and then some.
Yeah. And I just, this is slightly tangential, but I just want to make mention of it. And maybe just because it's like it's a personal conviction, that I have. But I think that one of the things that can get in the way of authors sort of assuming responsibility for business, for the business side of being an author. And again, I think you're right. It's important to be honest about your goals. So if you're like, I actually just want to write, but like I'm, whatever, I have $1 million coming in every month. I'm not looking to make money off my books. That's really important to know and to be honest with yourself about, so you know what do you want your books to do for you, right? Because then you can set goals and know whether or not you've hit that goal. So it helps you to calibrate your expectations and calibrate your goals. But I think one of the things that gets in the way of authors assuming that responsibility for the business is these sort of misplaced boundaries that we've put on what is creativity, right? So like your writing is not your only, like people who write are not the only creatives. People who make art are not the only creatives. And if you've talked to a brilliant business owner, that is a creative person. That is a tremendous amount of ingenuity and insight, and right, like it is also a form of creation. It is also an avenue by which someone is creative. And so we kind of got stuck in these false dichotomies of what is creative work or what is creativity, what is a creative person and what isn't. And I think that they have done a lot of harm, and it's not true. A great mathematician has a form of creativity that comes from their knowledge and their expertise and the way that their mind synthesizes information. And so just because it's business doesn't mean it's not creative. And I think that sometimes those hard lines that we draw get in the way of embracing the whole author life and embracing it with the most curiosity and verve and passion, the whole thing all together.
Yeah, and I think, yes, that and the fact that at the end of the day, unless you are writing it for your eyes only, there must be a way to get that book into people's hands. And that comes into all of that, right? Yeah. It's always so funny, like when I'm having these conversations, and I mean, I've been in business a long time. This is not our only business. And so when I'm having these moments and I'm coaching people, and when they're done, they're like, wait a minute, and what do you do again? And I tell them what I do, and you just finished. Yeah, I can coach anybody. Yeah. I just love steamy romance novels. You see what I mean? And that's just my jam. And, but what it also does is show that all of our situations are same or similar. At the end of the day, a book is a product. Mm-hmm. Simon and Schuster, they ain't out here on the creativity train. That is a book, is a product. Yeah. That author is a funnel. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. So like, don't get it twisted and don't fall asleep at the wheel. And even if that's the path that you want to go, do it in an informed way, so that you do the best by yourself and the best by your craft. And I think it also can inform, what conferences you go to, what rooms do you want to be in, what conversations do you want to have, and I think all of that can turn into how your books have longer legs, and can really go beyond you. I mean, the books that you love, and sometimes I'm questionable about, really long lives. And I think when you're in this sea of books and this era of creativity, how it sort of changes so much, I think it will still stand, right? Storytelling will still stand. Yeah. And I think I just always feel really, really blessed that I've never just put myself in a box. And it may be because I came from business first and, practicing law first, that if it was just creativity, I would not be doing all this, because I would not give myself that headache. I just wouldn't. But I take my responsibility of my stories and my business seriously. Yeah. And listen, I be showing up in the rooms. I'm showing up and showing out. I may not be dressed to death, because I ain't packing I'm not checking no luggage.
Packing no stinking ball gown, jeez Louise.
Listen, baby. However, I'm showing up, bright sunshiny faces, ready to get whatever it is that I can, and to be able to take that information and bring it to my community and bring it to my clients. Hence how I connected in the first place of, having that additional certification so that I can, usher my clients into places that I'm going to, whether it's 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, like it's all good. Let's go. And that's what we doing. It's like, this is what we do. And not playing. We came to eat, leaving no crumbs. And, and that's how we do. So it was a really great, inspiration, There was also a couple of talks. They actually have a writing program. I think they're going to be starting that's more for nonfiction, but even having where there'll be roundtables to find representation. And so that is good because that's kind of one of the big parts of her business, which is her books. So her editor had a session, which was really good. And we talked quite a bit. And so I think I think to be there and to glean, and then also to be there as a person who creates these kind of spaces, it was like, okay. Yeah. Like, I see you.
Yeah. Just sort of like, I'm getting some ideas for the first ever story deep dive writing retreat.
Come on. Listen. It was like, oh, all I got to do is see it. I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. So yeah, it was a great experience. Look, I know they're not doing it again in 2026. I don't think they're coming back again until 2027, I think. So I'm glad that I went. I'm really glad that I went. Mm-hmm. So with that said, y'all, we're about to get into this conversation. Y'all, we went all the way down the rabbit hole. We talked about business. I hope that you did not break out in hives. If you did, then that means you really needed to listen to that. Because you are a business, okay? You are a business if this is what you want to do. And you want to do right by the books that you work so hard to create. And if you have not done that, like, start having those sort of discussions now, because it's never too late and it's never too soon is the reality. So with that said, we are going to get ready to pivot this conversation. We are going to be talking about the characters in One for the Money by Janet Evanovich, which is a pick this month by Rachel. And we're having a great time talking about this sort of genre mashup of a novel. And today we will be talking about characters. But before we do that, Rachel is going to give us the summary, and then we're going to get into it.
Yeah, let me hit you with that summary. So I fumbled over it. I fumbled over it last episode. Let me see if I can get it out in one go without having to retry. In Janet Evanovich's One for the Money, recently fired lingerie buyer Stephanie Plum turns to bounty hunting for her sleazy cousin when her temp jobs dry up and her car gets repossessed. If she wants the $10,000 to pay off her debt and buy back her furniture, she must bring in Joe Morelli, an ex-cop wanted for murder. But Stephanie has no equipment, a dubious understanding of what is and isn't legal, and a crazed prize fighter on her tail, keeping her from both Morelli and the truth about the night Morelli allegedly killed a man in cold blood. And Morelli doesn't just not want to be found, he especially doesn't want to be found by Stephanie Plum. She hit him with her car, it's a long story. I had to turn on my newscaster voice to get through that. I was like...
Every time you say it's a long story, I'm thinking something else is going to come, okay?
So I was just trying to be cute in the summary.
Listen, Rachel said we are not going to be waiting on ChatGPT for the summary this week. Okay, Dana?
You know me, I have a personal, I'm like, I will make that summary myself. I will rack my brain, synthesize information, and put it in a doc.
You go right on ahead. High five for the both of us, okay? So with that said, we are going to jump into talking about the characters and what are some of the areas that you would like to cover in this conversation today?
So I have kind of two main topics that I want to talk about. The first is Stephanie as a character herself, and particularly using external skills or sort of like external growth kind of to show growth in the protagonist, which is something that we see a lot specifically in serial style stories. And then also talk about the kind of two basic types of character relationships you can introduce in a story, which is going to be pre-existing relationships and the new characters that are new to the protagonist. And also, you know, all of the characters are going to be new to the reader in a first book, but new relationships to the protagonist. And those are the two big overarching kind of categories I want to talk about. What about you? I know you had a couple of other things on your list as well.
I would say just one, because I feel like anything else will fall under that umbrella, which is the sort of looking at the cast of characters as a whole. Looking at sort of who are those characters, what role do they serve, and what is it that they add or contribute to the story. I think in this one, it was such a great example of that when we have things like humor and comic relief that's a part of that sort of framework. So looking at the cast as a whole, especially if you are looking to do something that's same or similar to a One for the Money. So with that said, go ahead and kick us off with talking about the sort of that protagonist. And I wrote it down as external skills, but I know you said it a little bit differently, like how we're sort of connecting or allowing them to grow across that serial.
Yeah. So, when you're looking at a serial style, a lot of times you're not looking at a lot of internal change in the protagonist, at least in any individual book, right? If you narrow it down to something like a trilogy, right, you will usually see a major growth point in the first book, and then a second major growth point in the second book, and then, the final culmination in the third book. But when you have sort of just a long running series, you usually won't see, you might see like a teeny like tick on the internal scale moving forward, but usually it's going to be way more subdued, and sometimes you won't really see it at all because it's more episodic. So when you're doing something like that, a really good way to do that is to have the protagonist grow in an external, in external skills, right? So in this case, Stephanie starts at the literal beginning, right? We're not looking, I like to contrast this with something like Harry Bosch, right? This Michael Connolly serial protagonist he's established in his role. He is, he's a hard-boiled detective, and he's gonna stand up to the man, and he knows what he's doing, and he's a loose cannon, but the captain keeps him on because he's just so good. Like that, that's like classic serial detective at any rate. But Stephanie Plum, God love her, she doesn't know what the heck she's doing. And what works so well about that is, in this story, Stephanie has not the faintest idea how to go about solving this problem. And we solve the problem by the end of the story, but she's so new to this that by the end of this story, she's really not that experienced. Like, she still doesn't really know what she's doing. And what that means is that, number one, it gave us loads of conflict and loads of kind of interesting, hilarious stuff to happen in the story, but it also gives the series room, right, to go somewhere, because she's not an expert. So in book 2, we might see her be marginally better than she was before, but again, she doesn't come from anything close to law enforcement. She used to be a lingerie buyer, right? So she picks up this job as being a bounty hunter, and even that is kind of a temporary thing. She's like, I just need the money. Okay. And we see her inexperience play out on the page. She doesn't know how to use a gun. She barely can pull off the pepper spray. She's without any kind of tools to use, and she doesn't know how to use those tools. And by the end, she sort of just barely scrapes through the story. And so again, the point being that over the course, we have at least a few books before Stephanie Plum is even mildly competent at her work. So much of a beginner is she. And so that's what's so great, is it still gives the story a sense of emotion, but without, Stephanie Plum finding herself or, uncovering, her life's calling. But you keep it very external, very light, but still give the story a feeling like it has somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm. I think one of those things too is very instrumental to just remind ourselves, this is the book 1, right? And that a lot of this gives us loads of context, right? That you are sort of setting the stage, and a lot of that, even though there isn't a lot of internal growth at all, a little bit kind of introspection of how she got here, but very little. It's setting a context for many more books to come. And so I do like the thought of looking at those external skills. I mean, she's trying. She's going to the gun range. Listen.
She's working on it. She's working on it.
When the person stole a gun, I'm like, girl, afterwards she was like, I just sat there. Take her purse. And it's like, girl, what's wrong with you? Even a regular person wouldn't let that happen. But whatever, you know. And the fact that she just thinks she's gonna waltz up in there and people are gonna, you know, it's one of those moments where my mom used to say, yeah, cute will only get you so far, right? And she's experiencing that. So I think having something where you're looking at the external skills, even though this is not a plot discussion, that is something that can help ground you, though, right? Of like, what does this look like for her? What are those, like, what is her baseline? Because this is the moment where we're introduced to her, and this is the moment we'll always go back to. So when we look at her at future stories, it will be laughable, like, oh, I remember when she let that dude take her purse and take her gun.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and what it begins to do is like let you start having those changes. And if you're someone that you're sort of looking out ahead of you of what that series could look like, you know, whether you're thinking 5 books, 10 books, to sort of just sprinkle out there and sort of cast a vision, you can begin to say, like, where would I like for her to be, you know, in each one of these areas, in her internal, her external, her competency, her level of comfort with her job. And what does that look like, not just in herself, but her against her environment, because that is a huge part of this story, right?
Yeah.
The characters, the town, her role and place in her family, right? And all of that. So yeah, I totally love that. And then you also had like some sort of perspective or a consideration when it came to those secondary characters as well.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're thinking about building out your secondary cast, there is 2 basic, we'll say like the 2 broadest buckets that you could start with, right? Which are pre-existing relationships, that is relationships that were, that the protagonist had before the story opened, before the reader ever got there. And then new relationships that the protagonist picks up along the way. And I think ideally you have a little bit of both, right? So we do want the protagonist to meet and encounter new people, because that's part of the excitement of building up the story, is the new people that they come to know. And it's also, you know, your protagonist, ideally they're getting exposed to a new world, right? Which means new people in it. So even for Stephanie Plum, she has, you know, even though this is New Jersey, it acts, and we talked about this before we were recording, it acts like a small town because it is the kind of it's the kind of place where people grow up and then stay. And so, you know, the town that I come from is kind of like that, where it's not really a small town. It's in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. But it's the kind of the kind of place where people grow up and end up settling and staying, so that there's a lot of history there, a lot of opportunities to run into people you went to high school with, kind of place, you know. And so so even though she's in this kind of environment, or in this kind of physical setting, she's seeing a whole new side of New Jersey, of her town, right? That she's never had occasion to come into contact with. So it brings something new to the protagonist's world. But you should have at least some pre-existing relationships in your story, because none of us are living in a vacuum, right? So when the story opens, having some kind of pre-existing dynamic helps your world feel lived in, right? Mm-hmm. Makes it feel like your protagonist didn't just fall off the turnip truck and all of a sudden they're just like, shoom, they're there, you know, because that's not how life works. We come with stuff. We come with connections. We come with pre-existing. So we get to uncover the pre-existing relationships and come to understand those, which is a part of the interest in the narrative drive of finding out who these relationships are and what the nature of this relationship is, while also getting to experience new ones. So really, when you're looking at your cast, you want to look that you have people falling in both of those buckets.
And I think what I was sort of pointing out was really a piggyback to that of like, when you're looking at this, especially because, it's cozy-ish, esque, adjacent, they're known for large casts, right? They're known for large casts. They also are known for casts that, especially in a book one, you're introducing, and they will come back, And so in this case, having that context, but also looking at who the character is, what is their role, what do they contribute to the story, what's unique about them. The uniqueness that is brought to the page is usually in either their job, their appearance, right? And you can even vary that in many ways. But the point is, having that cast, having a variety beyond just the fact that their archetypes are different, and having that sense of uniqueness. And in this story, I think she does a really great job of this. Even down to how she ended up here and how she got the job as a bounty hunter, right? Yeah. It's this distant or family member that nobody wants to deal with. And she's using all the juice in her favor to try to get some money. And I think with this, and I think that's one of those reasons why, to piggyback on what we talked about in the last episode, I think that gives it that cozy feel, because you have this sort of forced proximity style environment, and then you have this cast that is a nice size, that's reoccurring, and that their lives all come together, sort of bumping into each other based upon this new circumstance that Stephanie finds herself in. And then you, of course, have her regulars, like her parents and her grandmother, her best friend / friend, that are there in constant, but then she's sort of in a crossroads between her existing world and something new, and learning something new about herself. And I believe part of that in how she deals with those dynamics, both pre-existing and new, is how we begin to see her, even if that internal journey is slow and that external journey is about her her finding herself as this bounty hunter, and people kind of looking at her as being cute, and so she tells them why she's there. Right? Yeah. And sometimes her using that in her favor until it's run its course, and it makes for this environment where things are slowly unfolding, and as you revealed, like in a way of the action, but at the same time we're starting to get into those layers, and it makes it turn into this world that we want to come back to for 5 books, 10 books, 20 books, 30 books later. Right? 30 books later.
Well, and I want to just kind of highlight or piggyback off of something that you said as well, is like, just because your character doesn't have an internal arc, or a very, a robust or very obvious internal arc, does not mean they have to be flat, right? Those two things aren't necessarily like they're not, one doesn't require the other. So, you look at someone like Stephanie Plum, and it's in those relationships that we get to kind of see the different sides of her, see Stephanie as daughter, see Stephanie as granddaughter, see Stephanie as bounty hunter, see Stephanie as negotiator, we'll say, love interest, right? It's showing us these different sides of her, especially when you think about those lived-in relationships of like her family, when you see the way that she responds to them responding to this new thing that she's doing, right? Where all of these things are kind of weaving together to create the experience that we have inside of this story. And so, and again, and this is gonna, our character episode always connects to our plot episode, because plot and character, you can't separate them, because the way that you showcase your character is the way that they interact with the plot, right? And this comes back to not having a flat protagonist. How do they uniquely engage the problems that they are running into? Like, what is their first idea of a potential solution? Because I promise you, The way Stephanie Plum thinks through a problem is not the way Rachel would think through a problem. It is not the 4th, 5th, or 10th solution I would attempt to a problem. But Stephanie Plum is, the straits are dire, and she's like, I don't know, but how hard can it be? Vinny does it. It's fine, right? And so these are so that's just that. If you're doing a serial style protagonist or, protagonist that's not having a strong internal arc, that doesn't mean they have to be flat. It doesn't mean that they're boring, but it is incumbent upon you then to ensure that the way they interact with the plot is exciting and interesting. So if we come back to an example like Harry Bosch, first of all, he's pretty rough around the edges. So that defines the way that he interacts with people. And it gives him distinction because he says and does things that we and probably other protagonists would not say and do. But also he's ultra competent. So it's interesting to watch the way that he thinks and the way that he solves problems. And because he's a serial crime protagonist, the way that he interacts with the case is interesting to us. The way that he navigates that plot is compelling. And so that's, when you're looking at a protagonist without that kind of internal arc, that's the kind of thing that you really want to lock into, is their relationships with other characters and their unique approach to whatever conflict it is that you're putting them through.
Mm-hmm. I think the other part about this too is that for Stephanie, especially when you look at the context of this series, you really want to bag people on the hook for several books, right? And so it's really important that she's likable, that she's relatable, that we believe her, that we are willing to part with more of our hard-earned coins, okay?
So more of those books.
Okay, for several books. And I think this book does a great job of that. And even if you wouldn't have picked her method on your 1st through 5th choice, you could appreciate her at first thinking, oh, well, this can't be that big of a deal.
Yeah. Come on. How many times have any of us looked at a thing and we're like, I could probably do that. Handy things around the house, right? You've looked at something. I've looked at something and been like, I can fix that, please. What do you need? Super glue? No problem. And so you just take that thing, right? And then you just put it into a way more absurd scenario.
And she does it, right? She does it. But we also see someone who cares, right? Of I almost feel like because there is such a slow progression of their internal journey that we have to have access to the nuance, right? Of that, how she is with her mother, how she is with Lula, how she is with Vinny, how she is with Connie. And this is why your cast of characters are also so important, because they give you prime content to express that.
Yeah.
And so I think this is one of those areas where, listen, y'all, if you don't know this already, I am a plotter. I'm a plotter. I'm a plotter. I'm a plotter. It is what we do. Okay. And so this is where I think sometimes if you're not a plotter, it can bite you in the tush, right? Because you don't have the opportunity to see not just having that dynamic in that relationship, but how can you make it one that will really bring out something unique in your protagonist, so that we can do all those other things. Show her as relatable, show her as someone that is, in this case, not very competent and is doing her best that she can with her limited abilities to still do right by things. And also what courage looks like when she wears it. Right. That is one of those things that just makes her very endearing. Even when she's scared, she's just like, I don't even know why I said that. Right. Like, I'm being very brave. And we see it time and time again of like her being in situations where courage is not the absence of fear, but she's not letting the fear stop her even when it should. Right. even when she really should let it. And so I think this is one of those times where you begin to have the opportunity to build this cast of characters and allow their how their lives brought them to this place. Yeah. Also add a layer of color and dynamics to the story. And I think that's one of those reasons too why people love cozy mysteries, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, I'm still gonna call it cozy-ish, cozy adjacent. We get the benefit of that. Yeah. We get the benefit of those relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, that is, I think this is why it does at times feel cozy, because you have that strong recurring cast. And when you're in a serial, that recurring cast is a part of the draw. So if you would like to write a serial style novel, you have to work on your cast and make them, your cast is always going to be important, but in a serial style novel or even a series, right, of any kind, because I think about the Knock 'em Out books, right, that additional cast is like, can be one of those things that your reader is showing up not just for the protagonist, not just for the external conflict, but there are characters that your reader just can't get enough of, that they look forward to seeing, that they want to revisit, that they want the opportunity. Like that is part of what cozy is I want to settle into this series and just drink it all up. And that means that your cast is an essential part of that. So creating that variety of, you've got someone like Stephanie's grandma, and then you have someone like Morelli, and then Lula, and then someone like Ranger, right, who's kind of our mentor figure, but who has he's this sort of like this offset to Stephanie, and because of the contrast between those two people, it brings an element of comedy. Even though Ranger isn't specifically like, I wouldn't think of him as like a comedic relief character, but the pure juxtaposition of those two people in the same space, in the same line of work at the same time adds that comedy. So anytime he shows up, we're looking forward to it, because we're like, oh man, what's Stephanie gonna do and what's Ranger gonna do to try to set her straight, and
it made me think about how this really is a story of like callbacks, right? We talk a lot in story about flashbacks, but callbacks are something that are like really, really good. And in this sort of story, you get a lot of them. Like when she called Ranger one time, he's like, do you have on clothes? Right? You go back to the shower scene, like you just can't help it. And it becomes this thing where your story and your characters live rent free in your reader's head. And that's why even for a long time when I was tired of reading them, I would keep coming back because I wanted to see, are they really going to be together? Right. And I think having that dynamic would also make something like a series like this potentially exciting to write, even though you're writing about the same characters.
Yeah.
Right. Because that can be a thing, too. Right. A variety and changing things up, etc. And I think the last part that I will say, too, is having a sense of diversity of what they bring to the table. We've talked about the fact that this does have humor. It does have that sort of comic relief. You've got to have characters that can do that. You're not going to get it from a Ranger, right? He's going to give you some dry something. Morelli is going to give the quick wise crack responses just to get under her skin. But there's going to be things like Grandma Moser that, listen, when she had the gun and put the bullets in it, listen, and she gets worse as the stories go on, which just makes it amazing. So, having that dynamic makes it so that, honestly, it's just an enjoyable read that you can get lost in this story. And I think having a handful, and literally, I would say to this story, you probably had a good 10 to 12 constant characters. And so when you are doing your reading and you are looking at potential comps, pay attention to that. Yeah. Listen, y'all, this is not where you want to, pardon my French, this is not where you want to half-ass it. Yeah. Not here. This is not it, right? Because these are usually the characters that are going to stay with you. Now, there will be some that'll come and go, but having a solid cast it sets everything up well. And so that's something that is just, and I'm like, y'all can't see me if you're listening, but just makes the story just perfect. And again, here in this book one, knowing that this is a foundation, you really are going to have foundation for at least a few books that when you have a serial, because this covers usually a small slither of time. And then for at least a couple of books, you're getting an understanding of how these people operate in this space and why they're here and why them and why now, just like your protagonist, so that we're invested in Lula's story. Because y'all, she gets crazy in the series. We're invested in those characters the same way we're invested in seeing how Stephanie evolves. And it helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I was thinking about too is like, okay, so, if you are someone who's writing a serial style story and you're like, well, I've already written my first book, like I'm into my second or my third, right? Like part of what you're looking for, because you're using a recurring cast and because you are endearing your reader to that cast and they're looking forward to seeing, those characters show up again and again. I think one of the things that you want to think about is like when you're shaping this episode in your serial style story is how does this particular conflict, whatever that is for your protagonist, affect your secondary cast? Or how does it overlap with your secondary cast? Because what you're looking to do to create some of that variety, but also continue to showcase those characters, is putting them in new and unusual situations to give them the opportunity to shine, right? Like you get a character like Grandma Major, and then you give, so we already know she's kind of a loose cannon.
She is.
And then you put a gun in her hand, right? Like that setup was designed so we see her wacky grandma, and then it's like, wait till you see her with a gun, right? It's everything you hope it would be and more. And that's what you're looking for, right? Is to like use your setups to showcase not just your protagonist, but also your recurring cast and put them in new situations and allow us to see them in new lights too, right? Like a character like Lula, to see her in a new way because of the way that the conflict invites her to show up to the story. And that's so that conflict from your plot isn't just for your protagonist, it's for all of your other characters as well, and it gives them a chance to shine and for you to continue to invest your reader in them as a part of the story.
I think that is so good. You really can't separate it from our conversation last week. This part of humor, not just the spotlighting of your secondary cast and the cast that you have and why you pick them and why they're here in the story, but also in like what do they contribute, is an overflow from what we talked about last week with the plot. And so as you are reading stories like this, pay attention to that. Pay attention to how those elements are drawn in. And if you're doing something same or similar and it doesn't have humor, like also thinking about how in this case having those moments of humor sort of diffuses a lot of the fact that the external stakes, it's not just life or death, it's sort of the icky kind, right? That makes your skin a little bit crawl without being gruesome, but it's enough to give you pause. And so playing with those dynamics, it really is like those levers and being sure of like when to push and when to pull, and that you don't lose your reader before you really get them on the hook good.
Yeah. And I think that's it's important to kind of point out, if you're writing, again, any kind of series, but especially a serial, but it isn't a comedy, well, then you're looking at showing the depth and the nuance. Not that you can't do that in comedy, but the principle, right, still applies of the conflict and showing how it's impacting these characters and giving them new opportunities to be showcased and to see different sides of them and to see even their own small journeys of growth, or to see, to get, say one conflict in an episode of your serial brings your protagonist into contact with the backstory of one of these, recurring characters. So you can do this not just with comedy, not just putting a gun in Grandma Major's hand, but also, in emotional ways and in exploring depth of characters as well. So it's not just, it's not just comedy. It's true for comedy or drama.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, now that I think about it, and this is the last thing, unless you want to add anything else, I think what that allows you also to do when you have those open loops is, number one, to have open loops, right? Mm-hmm. We do close, but the close is like almost the temporary close before you sort of sprout into a new thing. But it does allow your protagonist a little bit more wiggle room. Mm-hmm. And some space to sort of grow, because we have all these sort of moving parts. It sort of reminds me of my husband and I started watching The Wire again. Mm-hmm. And we think it's so interesting because we watched it when it originally aired. Listen, I'm dating myself back when we didn't get a lot of reruns. And so we're watching it again and we're like, oh, wow, look at all these people that we now know that started off there, and we kind of knew, but we didn't remember their roles. And there's this one, I don't know, have you ever watched the series?
I have. It's on my list because it's, it's been acclaimed as a story and for its characters. So it's on my list, but one I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. So there's one particular character on there that is a secondary character. And he's one of the detectives, and it's so interesting because I didn't remember him at all. Like, I remembered him for being he likes to make handmade figurines, to put in dollhouses or whatever that people pay him a lot of money for. But he's doing it all the time, and he's sort of always quiet. And then all of a sudden, his ear is always on the conversations that are around him. And I sort of remembered him for the figurines, but not realizing that I kept finding myself saying, I like how they built out that character.
Yeah.
And it was just little things like the main guy, I can't remember his name. His partner that he had before was like, oh, he's a good cop. He's a good detective. Mm-hmm. He has like a classic how he solves problems. And so you start seeing how he problem solves and how he looks at a thing that's not the same and how he looks around, and you just wait for how he processes the same environment. And I think what it does is it makes it so that the not just the cast but the moment can be dynamic, and that it can be dynamic in such a way that you don't always like your protagonists. Readers will not always like them, but if they are invested in the world that you're creating, they will come back. And I think that is such an interesting thing to look at the outside, right? As a consumer looking at, oh, I like how they did it. Even how to the point where we finished season 1 and looking at the guy that sort of the kid that sort of is a little bit entitled, has some issues with race issues, and he sort of gets under the wing of this one secondary character and becomes a different version of himself using skills that he had. Now he's learning how to use those skills in a different way. And so this is where, even whether we're reading or we're looking at, this is a television series or a serial, technically it's a serial, but it's a series. And look at, how are those characters being used? What do they contribute and add to this environment, to the investigation of, in this case, was the investigation of these crimes and essentially investigation of murder that intersects with drugs and politics in Baltimore. It's in Baltimore, housing projects. And so, and how you just see this as these small circle, but it has this ripple effect. And I think that's one of those things, again, I'm sorry, that we can learn when it comes to characters and take inspiration of when you have that ensemble cast, being intentional about how you assemble them and then how they integrate and evolve through your story, their own storyline in the context of the overarching arc.
Yeah.
Sorry, y'all.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and I think that, just again, you're looking at, and I think TV shows are really quite a great way, if you're looking at serial style, television is a great thing to look at. You should read books. You should, because they are your medium, so you study in your medium. But television shows have to accomplish similar things of endearing us to a full cast and taking a protagonist on a journey, but over the course of, over an episodic sort of, an episodic arc, right? And so I think that just remembering to keep your writer hat on when you're not just reading, but when you're watching TV shows and when you're watching movies. I am literally studying a couple of television shows with one of my clients right now because of the way that they refine historical narrative into something that is narratively organized and cohesive, even though history is not naturally that way. Like, real life doesn't work like stories because it's much messier and more complicated. But seeing it done in television shows is really helpful because they've been very popular and they were like kind of true to history, but they, combined events and they cleaned up the narrative so that you can follow it. And then now being able to translate that into a historical fiction, right? And so I'd keep your writer hat on with your movies and your TV shows as well as your books.
Mm-hmm. I guess the last part, and I think this is it. I think it's like this is one of those, and maybe because it is a serial, and that I still think it's I don't think it's the same. I don't have the same feeling as I did with the Sookie Stackhouse, even though that was a long series. I think this is a little bit different to me, and I haven't given a whole lot of thought as to why, but it is. But I think if this is the lane that you want to operate in, because whether it's a cozy that you're operating in, or you want to be in this sort of, I would say there's the probably lanes would be cozy mystery, and then just your regular suspense or thriller, sort of novels. I'll start having this sort of running dialogue that's in your head, looking at these elements, because these are the ingredients of success in this arena.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Point blank, period. And you've got to start having that be able to recall those sort of elements, whether it is in a book or you're looking at a television series, and ensuring that you give yourself time to say, well, how would I translate that to the written word? How would I bring that to the page? But having that so that when you are starting this journey of doing something that could be 1, 3, 5, 10, 30 books, you are creating something that you enjoy and that readers enjoy, and it's just mutually beneficial. And we get to watch it evolve. And I think that's where something like this would seem so exciting, to build this cast and you get to just sit here and play in that world. Oh my gosh. But yeah. Any other things before we call this done?
No, we hit everything on my list.
Alrighty. Well, with that said, y'all, thank you so much. Y'all, listen, y'all coming from Houston. Okay, y'all. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Story Deep Dive. If you have not done so already, don't forget to visit us online at storydeepdive.com, where you can find out more about us. You can leave your comments, questions for our rare episodes where we have Q&A. Also, we will see you all in the final installment of our discussion of One for the Money by Janet Evanovich, which we'll just sort of have our editor's takes in the next episode. And we haven't done so, but if there's any books that you would like for us to consider for future episodes, definitely
Please.
let us know, because we always have our eyes and ears open for new selections. So with that said, we are out. Thank you for joining us, and as always, happy writing. Goodbye.